25 miles east of Santa Fe on State Road 63 is the Pecos National Historical Park. The lofty adobe ruins rise from a pinon-dotted landscape, hinting to a sprawling center of activity centuries ago, a history Carl Cordova will be sharing with me today.
Pecos Pueblo Indians were here for 1,000 years. The Spanish and Francisco Vasquez de Coronado made his first visit here. Later on, the Spanish missionaries came and built this mission church and lived amongst the Indians. We had events like Stephen Kearny, as he's making his march from Fort Leavenworth to plant the American flag in Santa Fe, came right through this valley and he essentially walked into Santa Fe, was able to claim it for the United States. Later on, the Santa Fe Trail was established, so that really opened up the migration from the east coast of the United States to the west coast and Mexico in the south.
It's kind of been a meeting place, in between place for many centuries, it seems like.
It is, that's right. You know, we consider this a cultural crossroads. This is on the border between the Plains Indians territory and the Rio Grande Valley Pueblo territory. And it's a low pass in the Sangre de Cristo mountain range that allowed an easy convergence of those two different cultures to meet here, where the Plains Indians could bring goods such as buffalo robes and hides and meat protein, and the Pueblo Indians could bring things like pottery, corn, rugs, and have a good exchange here without one tribe necessarily having to travel very far or to have to go into somebody else's territory. Because that commodity, that exchange of goods was occurring here at the time that Francisco Vasquez de Coronado came through, he found this as a very hospitable place. And later on, the Spanish missionaries came and built these beautiful Spanish missions. The convento that we're standing in right now was this exchange of European culture and ancestral Indian culture kind of blending together and forming a lot of what the culture that still exists in northern New Mexico today.
We make our way from the ruins of this hillside to examine another chapter of history.
So Carl, what's the historical significance of this location?
Well, where we're at now is an overlook to the Battle of Glorieta that occurred during the Civil War in the 1860s. So the Confederates were moving north to take over Fort Union. The Union forces knew they could not give up that strategic point, so they met here and a battle for 3 days occurred. And the Confederate forces were actually winning the battle each day, pushing the Union forces back a little bit more each day. However, a local military man by the name of Manuel Chavez, along with John Shivington from the Colorado Volunteers, outflanked the Confederates by moving up over Roe Mesa and dropping down to the supply train of the Confederates down at Johnson's Ranch in our Cañoncito. By burning down all of their materials and their supplies, the Confederates knew that they didn't have the materials to continue to advance to take the big battle at Fort Union. At that decisive point, the Confederate forces retreated all the way back to Texas following the Rio Grande River.
That's huge.
It's an integral part of the Civil War. It prevented the Confederates from getting the money that they needed in order to continue their advancement and support their war efforts.
So the New Mexican volunteers were like the pivotal point for the Civil War and how it could turn and change. So
absolutely.
You don't hear that very often.
While we've revisited multiple eras of our nation's history, there's more to come. On a nearby bluff and across an old bridge is an estate known as Forked Lightning Ranch. Architect John Galmeen was hired by rodeo producer John Van Osten, aka Tex, to design a ranch house on this land in 1925. Unfortunately, Tex's finances weren't as stellar as his showmanship, and he lost the ranch, ultimately bought by Buddy Fogelson, whose actress wife Greer Garson hosted fabulous parties within its walls. If they could talk, I can only imagine the tales they would tell. Stop by the Kozlowski Stagecoach stop on the property for a photo op. And don't miss the incredible exhibits at the Visitor Center for a deeper look into the site's history.